As you know, all this stems from this week's Supreme Court ruling that the most recent congressional districts that were drawn are unconstitutional and represented racial gerrymandering. The court says states can almost never use race as the main factor in redistricting, even if the intent is to comply with the Voting Rights Act, not to dilute minority voting power. There are still several moving parts to this saga. First, Governor Jeff Landry issued an order pausing the House primaries until lawmakers can approve a new map. But that's being challenged in court by congressional 5th District candidate Lindsey Garcia and several civil rights organizations. So it's possible that the election will not be delayed from May 16th.
That is correct. It just depends on how the courts rule. So
you should vote for everything on the ballot, senator, amendments, and the House races. If the court rules that the congressional race can't be suspended, the votes cast in those races on May 16th will still count. Now, the legislature has until the end of the session on June 1st to redraw the congressional maps or vote to extend the session. But that process really began before the SCOTUS ruling.
The legislature has already made plans to draw new maps because there are, bills in the legislature that were sort of set there as kind of just in case circumstances.
And once those new maps are passed in the legislature and signed by the governor, those new maps could be challenged.
There will absolutely be lawsuits against the new one. That redistricting is fraught with politics. It's because it's about the distribution of voters, and that basically leads to the distribution of power for both parties. And so it's a very contentious process.
It is now a little harder to legally challenge those maps, but each district must still have the same number of people in them regardless of eligibility. It doesn't matter if they're too young to vote, aren't registered to vote, or are convicted felons who cannot vote. It used to be that redistricting was done once a decade to comply with the numbers in the U.S. Census. But now it's being done more frequently for political purposes.
That's what redistricting is all about, is wasting as many votes of your opponent's party as you can and maximizing your political power. And so sometimes we do get these bizarrely drawn districts as a result of that.
Ideally, citizens would be grouped with people in the same community with common interests. Where does it end?
That's a great question. Given the fact that redistricting is always going to be a controversial and very, partisan specific enterprise. And so plans will always be challenged.
And the U.S. Constitution states that the election has to be on November 3rd this year, so the primary has to happen before, with enough time for election officials to get everything ready. It's still unclear if this legal process will affect whether the state sticks with a partially closed primary.
All right, Meg, more to come for sure, and it is quite confusing, so thanks for clearing that up for us. Again, early voting starting tomorrow. The races for U.S. Senate are still up for grabs, along with the State Public Service Commission and Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. You'll also decide on 5 constitutional amendments. There are also local races in several parishes, and we do have a link to where you can find your sample ballot on WWLTV.com.